Hi everyone, this is our multimedia presentation on disability studies. My name is Sienna Padrini.
My name's Alyssa Sinsat.
And I'm Victoria Papania.
So for the table of contents, we have first, what is the disability studies, the problem and the purpose. Second, area of disability studies, the principles. Third, history, scholars and background. Fourth, engagement, social justice, creativity and wellness. And lastly, the tie into liberal studies, additional comments and views. First, what is disability studies? The study of disability stresses the role of the disability community in defining problems and evaluating solutions, and it focuses on the experiences of handicapped people. The purpose of the disability study is to analyze a part of human existence and experience that is not necessarily something everyone has to deal with, but does include 15% of the world, which is approximately 1 billion people. To better understand the experiences people with disabilities endure and what their family also has to deal with as well. Like many oppressed groups throughout history, disabled people have been very much a part of the oppressed. Because of this, it has led to very minimal attention for them in terms of cultural, historical, and political dimensions of disability. Through ignorance, false assumptions, and prejudice leading to exclusion and separation, society has prevented people with disabilities from exercising economic, social, and cultural rights on an equal footing with people who aren't disabled. Discrimination based on disability has had notably negative consequences in the areas of education, work, housing, transportation, cultural life, and access to public spaces and services. Within the area of disability studies, we can define it as the study of nature, meaning, and effects of disability. It is an interdisciplinary field in which the sciences, social sciences, and humanities all intersect. The medical and social constructs that surround disability are the focus of disability studies. The medical model, functional model, and social model are the three most common models of disabilities. 6 principles of IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, states that the Individual with Disabilities Education Act is a federal statute that established special education standards and criteria. The law ensures that qualifying students with disabilities have access to specifically designed curriculum as well as the individualized assistance and support they require to succeed in public school. The IDEA is built on 6 disciplines, which are outlined below. First, free appropriate public education. Second, appropriate evaluation. Third, individualized education program. Fourth, least restrictive environment. Fifth, parent and student participation in decision making. And 6, procedural safeguards.
So next we're going to talk about the history of disability studies. So we're just going to go over the background information and the scholars that were involved with the history of disability studies. So the disability studies started with the disability movement in the late 20th century and mostly began in the US and then a little bit in the UK as well. It started and stems from the civil rights movement, which kickstarted scholars to starting to notice that people with disabilities were being denied rights that others would get. And in the quote, all members of the public should have equal access to facilities used by the public. This is a quote by President Lyndon B. Johnson in regards to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And he's basically saying that everyone should have equal access to facilities, and people with disabilities and in disability studies started saying that this should include disabilities having access to public buildings and transportations and equal protections. And then another thing is the mental and physical disabilities. Recently, disability studies has included mental and chronic conditions as a part of the discipline, but mental disabilities hasn't always been a part of it. And another thing that they often discuss in disability studies is disabilities do not lower someone's worth. It is believed that the ability to do something does not determine a person's worth or life. And just because someone can't do something or is impaired in some way, it doesn't mean that they have less of a life of someone who doesn't. And Americans with Disability Act in 1990 was formed from these protests and activism within the disability studies. And they were able to get this law passed that banned discrimination and allows more inclusion with people that have disabilities. So some scholars we're going to talk about is Angie Ash, and she was born in 1946 and lived until 2013. And in her article, Disabilities, Bioethics, and Human Rights, it's discussed that she is the first scholar that brought disability studies and bioethics to scholars. She believed that these two areas of studies intersected, and bioethics are important to help advance disability studies and their rights. Bioethics is looking at the ethics in technology, biology, and medicine, and she believes that these two intertwine. She often attacks the better dead than disabled mentality, going back to how an ability to do something does not determine someone's worth. And she often talks about how to gain independence within disability. So if you have a disability, how to gain that independence back, and wants to show in advanced ways of how healthcare workers in particularly can help people with disabilities gain this independence. And then another article that she wrote, Recognizing Death with Affirming Life, she often talks about the end of life treatment and how medical staff can be better at thinking that a disability does not mean death, and how to better care for someone who is disabled, going back to this better dead than disabled mentality. So Peter Beresford was born in 1945 and is currently still alive, and he's a UK scholar. He has personal experience with mental health in the psychiatric system, and he often uses this experience a lot in his articles. A lot of scholars in the disability studies tend to use their personal experience or are disabled themselves, and that's a common theme within this study. And in his article, What Have Madness and Psychiatric System Survivors Got to Do with Disabilities and Disability Studies, he talks about how mental health can go with disability studies and how the media portrayal of disabilities and mental health in general are damaging, and how mental health survivors are part of the conversation in disability studies, which once again goes into the whole how mental disabilities are newer to this area of studies. He also is a co-founder and chair of an organization called Shaping Our Lives. And this organization helps people with disabilities and helps them have independence and offers ways to help them and be a support system to them. Irving Zola is another scholar that we're going to be talking about. He was born in 1935 and he died in 1994. He founded the Society for Disability Studies, and the society aims to study more about disability studies in different areas of everyday life, like politics and society. So they help make these laws or acts that help gain rights for people with disabilities, because we still have a long way to go. And they also do research and spread awareness about disabilities and help promote change in society. So once again, just spreading awareness. And through this society, he also created the Irving K. Zola Emerging Scholar Award. And this is an annual award that recognizes young scholars who write papers that are ready for publishing that are about disability studies. So just furthering that awareness as well. He has a disability himself from polio, and he had to use a cane and wheelchair, which he often refers to in articles like other scholars in this disability studies. And he often talks about how normal and valid to invalid, and talks about the process of being someone who was once seen as normal in society and then going from someone who was seen as not. And he brings awareness to it, just like the argument that having a disability means that you're not worthy of life. He often combats that and how there shouldn't be a normal in society and that everyone's life is valid.
Next, we have the engagement of disability studies, including social justice, creativity, and wellness, and how it ties into the liberal arts. Starting off with social justice and how it ties into this discipline. Disability studies has provided new ways of thinking about disability and special education, or even those students who learn differently than what is assumed as normal. Disability studies also promotes changing what society thinks of children with disabilities. For example, thinking of a disability as a social, cultural, economic, material, historical, and or political phenomenon allows people to see disability as a part of the normal human experience instead of a medical problem. Because of the lack of awareness and lack of resources given to those with disabilities, many of these children do not have the same opportunities, abilities, or privileges that many other students may have. Moving on to creativity, many classrooms and other options that are open to children with disabilities take a creative and fun approach in order to help the children learn. Some of these creative approaches include drawing, building, painting, and crafts. The use of these creative approaches and the ways of thinking, such as art therapy in school, is helpful to those with disabilities because it is unconditional, subjective, and decidedly infinite. This allows people with disabilities to express themselves in their own unique way without social, physical, or attitudinal obstacles. Lastly, wellness. Studies have shown that people with disabilities are more likely than people without disabilities to have poor overall health, less access to average health care, more likely to smoke later in life, and general physical inactivity. Those with disabilities now need health care and health programs for the same reason any other person does in order to stay active, well, and a part of the community. Next, we have the issues within disability studies, which include a lack of available options, lack of information to families about procedures, inconsistency between various educational providers and sectors, funding unavailable for conditions such as mild intellectual disabilities, behavior problems, and learning difficulties, a physical environment that is not accessible to them, lack of relevant assistive technology, services, systems, and policies that are either non-existent or hinder the involvement of those with a health condition in any area of life. Also, disability studies can tie into the liberal studies because liberal studies help us understand how to adapt to different students in both communicating with them and teaching them. And these skills are useful when helping children with all sorts of disabilities, both in learning and education, and that could be mental or physical as well.
For our peer activity, we decided to make a paragraph of putting yourself in the shoes of someone with a disability. What everyday struggles do you think they experience while enduring this disability and living with it? And then we wanted everyone to write a paragraph of what struggles you could come up with in your perception of living with a disability after this presentation and after the activity. Thank you.